The dinner service had only just begun, but already the air inside the grand restaurant felt charged with unease. Every polished surface gleamed, every crystal glass sparkled beneath the chandelier's glow, yet none of it could ease the knot of dread in the stomachs of the staff. They had heard the news an hour before. Mr. Damian Cross, billionaire investor, was dining here tonight. His reputation preceded him, a man who wielded his fortune like a sword and struck down anyone who dared displease him. The first hint of his arrival came in the screech of tires outside. A chauffeur opened the door of a sleek black car, and Damian stepped out dressed in an immaculate navy suit. His expression was already set in disdain, as if the very existence of the world offended him. The maitre d', Mr. Levine, rushed forward, bowing slightly as though greeting royalty. "Good evening, Mr. Cross," he said carefully. "Your table is ready." Damian didn't so much as nod. His eyes swept the lobby, sharp and cold, and he muttered, "I should hope so. I don't tolerate waiting." He brushed past, leaving a faint trail of expensive cologne and an even stronger trail of tension. Inside the dining room, the servers straightened their uniforms nervously. Trays rattled faintly in their hands. Maria, a young waitress with tired eyes but a determined smile, stood among them. She had heard the horror stories from the staff, how Damian once sent back an entire meal because the garnish was not arranged artistically enough, how he once made a hostess cry for not recognizing his face fast enough. Mr. Levine led him to the best table, near the panoramic windows. Damian sat down heavily, gesturing impatiently for a chair to be pulled. A busboy hurried forward, fumbling slightly, and Damian's gaze landed on him like a spotlight. "Pathetic," Damian muttered aloud. "Do you not know how to do even the simplest task? If this is the standard here, I should have gone to Milan instead of wasting my evening." The boy's ears burned red. He mumbled an apology and scurried away. Laughter rippled from Damian's lips, not warm laughter, but sharp, meant to wound. A waiter approached with water, his hand trembling slightly. As he poured, a single drop slipped down the crystal glass. Damian snatched it away and held it up. "Unacceptable. Do you call this service? You think because I am rich I do not notice details? Idiots, all of you." His voice carried through the restaurant, heads turning at nearby tables. The waiter's eyes glistened as he backed away, muttering apologies. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the clinking of Damian's watch as he tapped the table impatiently. Maria felt her chest tighten as she watched. It wasn't just rudeness, it was cruelty, deliberate and precise. She caught the eye of another server, who looked down quickly, his jaw clenched. None of them wanted to be his target, yet none of them could escape him. "Bring me the menu," Damian barked, snapping his fingers as though summoning a servant from centuries past. Maria was the closest, so she stepped forward, her hands steady though her pulse hammered in her throat. She placed the menu before him gently. He didn't thank her. Instead, he flicked his eyes over her, head to toe, before sneering. "Do they hire children here now? You look like you couldn't balance a tray of breadsticks, let alone serve me." The comment cut, sharp and humiliating. But Maria said nothing, her lips pressed together, and she bowed her head slightly, stepping back as his laughter echoed again. Around her, she could see the others, their eyes lowered, shoulders slumped. Already, the evening felt poisoned. One by one, Damian would strip away their confidence until the entire team was left trembling. Tears threatened in the eyes of the younger staff, and a heavy hopelessness hung in the air. And all the while, Damian Cross sat at his table like a king surveying his court, feeding not on the food he had yet to order, but on the quiet suffering of those forced to serve him. In the kitchen, the tension thickened like smoke. The clatter of pans and utensils was quieter than usual, every movement hushed as though the staff were afraid the billionaire's voice might reach them even here. Whispers traveled like wildfire, what he had said to the busboy, how he had humiliated the waiter, the cruel laugh that seemed to echo still. Chef Laurent, usually a man of thunderous commands and strict precision, stood stiffly at the stove, his brow damp with sweat. He glanced at the menu ticket Damian had just sent back. "Medium rare filet," he muttered. "But he's written, don't overcook like peasants usually do." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He knew better than to complain aloud. One outburst could cost him his job. At a side counter, the busboy sat on a stool, face buried in his hands. He was only 17, working part-time to save money for college, and now his eyes were red from tears he had fought so hard to hide. Maria passed by, resting a hand on his shoulder briefly. He gave a weak smile but said nothing. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered, though she knew the words were hollow. Damien got to everyone. Out in the dining hall, Damien's voice rang out again. How much longer do I need to wait? What is this? Amateur hour. I should buy this place and fire all of you. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling lazily on his phone as though the entire restaurant were nothing more than background noise to his existence. The maitre d' hurried to his table, bowing low. Just a few moments, sir. Chef Laurent is preparing your steak to perfection. Damien didn't look up. If it isn't perfect, you'll regret it. Do you understand? His words cut like knives, and Levine's lips trembled as he forced a smile. Nearby, two servers exchanged glances, their eyes filled with silent frustration. One whispered to the other, how can he speak to people like this? Doesn't he realize we're human? Money blinds people, the other muttered. And he has more than most men will ever see. Maria carried a tray of bread and butter to a family seated a few tables away. Even as she smiled politely at them, her ears caught Damien's every word. Each insult weighed heavier, crushing the spirit of the staff. She could see it in their eyes, fear, resentment, helplessness. They were trapped. When the steak was finally ready, Laurent himself carried it out, silver platter trembling just slightly in his grip. He set it down before Damien with a flourish he didn't feel, and stepped back. Damien cut into the steak, chewed slowly, and then spat his bite into the napkin. The entire room froze. This is garbage, he declared, tossing his fork onto the plate. You call this meat? I've had better dog food in Tokyo. His voice carried, loud and deliberate, meant to wound. The chef's face turned ashen. He opened his mouth to defend himself but then shut it quickly, swallowing his pride along with the insult. He gave a stiff bow and returned to the kitchen, shoulders heavy. By now, tears brimmed in more than one pair of eyes. A young hostess quietly slipped away to the restroom, unwilling to let Damien see her cry. Another server's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her tray. And Damien smiled, not a smile of joy, but one of victory. He thrived on control, on breaking people down until they were shadows of themselves. It was his game, and tonight, he was winning. Maria leaned against the service station, gripping the edge until her knuckles whitened. She felt the weight, pressing down, the hopelessness that had settled over her coworkers like a storm cloud. Yet beneath her fear, something else flickered. Anger. The kind that burned slow, steady, unyielding. She exhaled slowly. Someone had to put a stop to this. Someone had to remind Damien Cross that he wasn't untouchable. And though her heart pounded at the thought, Maria felt the decision forming inside her, unshakable. If no one else dared, she would be the one to stand her ground. The restaurant had fallen into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint tinkling of glasses and the distant hum of the city outside. The weight of Damien's words clung to the air, suffocating, as though no one dared breathe too loudly. Every staff member moved with mechanical precision now, each step careful, each glance toward his table filled with dread. The man had reduced them all into shadows, scurrying to avoid his glare. Maria, standing near the service station, watched as Damien swirled his wine with a look of contempt, muttering under his breath about mediocrity. The busboy had disappeared into the kitchen, and Maria knew he was probably still fighting tears. The chef had buried himself in his work, but the slump of his shoulders betrayed his defeat. It was too much. Her pulse quickened, her chest felt hot, burning with something that had been growing all evening. Fear, yes, but stronger than fear was the rage curling in her stomach. Enough was enough. When Damien snapped his fingers again, demanding attention, Maria didn't wait for anyone else to respond. She walked forward, her footsteps steady, though inside, every nerve screamed at her to turn back. Damien's eyes flicked to her, a slow, deliberate once-over. He smirked. Ah, the child again. Tell me, are you even trained? Or are you just here to smile and hope tips fall into your lap? The words stung, but Maria didn't flinch. She placed her hands lightly on the table, leaning just slightly forward. Sir, she began, her voice calm but carrying a firmness that made nearby heads turn. I think we've all heard enough from you tonight. The restaurant froze. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the back. Even Damien raised an eyebrow, his smirk faltering into mild surprise. No one had ever spoken to him that way here, not the maitre d', not the chef, not anyone. What did you say? His tone was low, dangerous. Maria straightened, her chin lifting. I said we've heard enough. You've insulted the busboy, humiliated the waiter, disrespected the chef, and mocked the entire staff. And for what? To prove you can, to make yourself feel taller by standing on other people's backs. A murmur rippled across the dining room. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide, as though watching a play unfold. The staff peeked from doorways and corners, hardly daring to believe what they were seeing. Damien's laugh came sharp and incredulous. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Do you realize what I could do to this restaurant? To your job? I could buy this place tomorrow and have you scrubbing floors." Maria met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe you could, but none of that would change what's true. You treat people like dirt because you think money makes you better than them. It doesn't. Respect isn't bought, and right now, you don't have any." The words landed like a slap, not just on Damien but across the whole room. Gasps filled the silence. The maitre d' half raised his hand, as though to intervene, but stopped. Something in Maria's stance held everyone still. Damien's face darkened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing into sharp slits. "Careful," he hissed. "You're playing a dangerous game." Maria's hands didn't shake, her voice didn't waver. "No, Mr. Cross, you're the one playing a game. And tonight, you've gone too far." For a moment, the billionaire simply stared at her, searching for the tremor of fear he expected, the retreat he was used to commanding. But none came. Maria stood steady, unmovable. In that fragile silence, something shifted. The staff, once cowed and broken, began to lift their heads. Shoulders straightened, eyes brightened, a spark of courage flickered among them, ignited by her words. And for the first time that evening, Damien Cross looked less like an untouchable giant and more like a man cornered by truth. Damien sat frozen, his wine glass still poised between his fingers. The room around him felt changed, no longer a stage where he commanded fear, but a hall full of eyes watching closely, silently judging. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until the billionaire broke it with a harsh, brittle laugh. "Well," he said, his voice sharper than the cutlery on the table, "aren't you brave? A little waitress with a sharp tongue. Do you think this performance makes you a hero?" He leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning, though it was thinner now, less certain. Maria stood tall, though her pulse hammered in her ears. "It's not a performance," she replied firmly. "It's the truth, and everyone here knows it." Around them, heads nodded, small at first, hesitant, then stronger, bolder. The waiter who had been humiliated earlier straightened his back, his lips pressed tight but resolute. The busboy peeked from the kitchen doorway, his eyes still red but glowing with something like hope. Even Chef Laurent stepped out, arms crossed, his usual pride flickering back into place. Damien's smirk faltered further as he noticed the shift. He was used to isolated victims, easy to knock down one by one. But now, they stood together. He tapped the stem of his glass against the table, the sound sharp and impatient. "You think solidarity will protect you?" he sneered. "I could buy this restaurant tomorrow. I could end all of your jobs in a heartbeat." Maria's voice carried clear and steady, echoing through the dining hall. "Maybe you could, but money doesn't erase the truth. You came here expecting fear. You wanted to see people crumble, to feel powerful. But not tonight, not anymore." Gasps rippled again, but no one looked away. The other diners, once pretending not to hear, were now openly watching, some even murmuring words of quiet approval. A woman at a nearby table whispered, "Good for her." Damien's hand tightened around his glass. For a moment, it looked as though he might hurl it across the room. Instead, he slammed it onto the table, the wine sloshing over the rim. He rose slowly, towering, his shadow falling over Maria. "You should be terrified right now," he hissed. Maria lifted her chin, refusing to step back. "I was," she admitted softly, but her eyes locked with his, unyielding. "Not anymore." The words hung in the air like a final blow. And something in Damien's posture shifted, ever so slightly. His towering stance no longer felt commanding but strained, almost defensive. The staff behind Maria were no longer trembling. They stood straighter, united, their silence no longer submissive but strong. Damien scanned their faces, one after another. No bowed heads, no averted eyes. The power he had fed on was gone, slipping from his grasp like sand through his fingers. For the first time, he was the one cornered. With a sharp motion, he grabbed his coat from the chair. "This place isn't worth my time," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "Enjoy your little moment of defiance. It won't last." He strode toward the exit, his footsteps hard against the polished floor. The maitre d' started after him, but Maria held out a hand. Stopping him. "Let him go." The glass doors swung shut behind Damien Cross, and silence followed for a long, heavy beat. Then, slowly, the staff began to breathe again. The waiter exhaled shakily, the busboy wiped his eyes, and the hostess returned from the hallway with relief softening her face. Chef Laurent stepped forward, placing a hand on Maria's shoulder. That, he said quietly, with rare emotion, took courage. Maria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs trembled now, the adrenaline fading, but she managed a small smile. Someone had to do it, she whispered. The staff gathered closer, their spirits lifted, their dignity restored. The restaurant felt lighter, as if a storm cloud had finally passed. And though Damien Cross had left in fury, everyone who remained knew one thing for certain: the night he tried to break them had become the night they found their strength. And it all began with one waitress who refused to bow.